We are 35 movies into this catalog, which means that we're 13 movies into the New 52 timeline. And believe it or not, despite all the times he's been featured and been a central character, this is the first movie that's actually about Batman in this canon. I know, it's weird. It's a typical night in Gotham. Batman rescues a child from Bane, Lady Shiva drops a hint about a Lazarus Pit break-in, and Catwoman comes out of retirement to steal the money meant for ransom. Batman gives chase, but his grapple line is shot and he's gravely injured, though is miraculously nursed back to health by his childhood friend Tom Elliott. Catwoman is actually working for Poison Ivy, being mind-controlled by her sapphic wiles, though once she breaks free, she goes to Batman and they agree to work together to take her down. Ivy is also controlling Superman, but that's not important because she's working with a new villain, Hush, whom Batman is on the trail of once he and Catwoman defeat her. As the movie goes on, it's revealed that for Hush,
it's not about money, it's about sending a message.
And to that end, he releases the Joker and frames him for killing Tom Elliott, causing Batman to nearly kill him. Though Batman immediately tells Selina to leave in fear of her safety, they end up sleeping together, he reveals his secret identity to her, and they start fighting crime together. Things seem to be going well, at least in montage. Then, she gets immediately kidnapped. Nice. Oh, and Nightwing is once again a useless waste of space. Wonderful. Oh, and the Riddler caused trouble and Batman caught him. He goes to Arkham and deduces that Riddler is actually Clayface, and that the real Riddler is actually Hush, who got super smart and strong by dunking in the Lazarus Pit, and that Hush had kidnapped Catwoman. After an intense rescue and encounter, Batwoman defeats Riddler as the factory explodes around them. When Batman tries to save him from dying, Catwoman cuts the line, saving both of their lives. Realizing that Batman would rather die than sacrifice one of the criminals he fights, she breaks up with him, and Batman is left alone. Roll credits. So I want to reiterate, this is the first solo Batman movie that isn't Elseworlds since Killing Joke 9 movies ago. Before that, it was Dark Knight Returns 20 movies ago. It feels really surreal to say that, but it's true. And speaking of Dark Knight Returns, this movie feels similar in a lot of ways, in that it's attempting to explore the character of Batman and what makes him tick. While that film is much better than this one, that isn't to say that this movie doesn't have any value. For one, it correctly identifies the biggest problem with the Batman character, his inability to kill the criminals he faces. Now, that's problem as in mental hang-up, not problem as in I don't like it, to be clear. Batman's code is prominently mentioned and featured, and a statement is made about the nature of insanity. At its core, insanity is being in some way unable to control one's own actions, either through a mental deficiency, substance abuse, or obsession.
Damn it.
Yes, by the movie's logic, Batman is insane, which, yeah, that checks out. There's a large and ongoing debate over the ethics of Batman fighting these villains, putting them into a mental asylum instead of a prison, and then letting them escape again ad nauseum. But this video is not for that. For now, the movie sees this as his biggest character flaw. His duty to the mission is what keeps Bruce Wayne from being happy. Arguably, it's a mission that needs to be completed, but even when he's specifically groomed Dick Grayson to take up the mantle, he refuses to step down. Selina is ruffled a bit by this, but it only becomes a real problem when it's taken to its logical extreme at the end. And yes, for better or worse, this movie is primarily about the relationship between Bruce Wayne and Selina Kyle. The Batman-Catwoman pairing has been immensely popular for years, and was actually canon back in the pre-Crisis Earth 2 days, and there was a huge shitstorm about it when Catman walked out on the wedding in the comics. But in terms of just this movie, I think that the relationship is handled fairly well. For one, chasing Selina is maybe the first time that we've seen Batman smile, like, ever, so she was already batting high for me. Throughout the movie, Selina tends to bring out the best in Batman, and we get to see Bruce actually enjoying himself here and there, which is a really refreshing change of pace. And though this is an ensemble piece, it's similar to The Death of Superman in that it squarely focuses on its main romantic pairing. Funnily enough, this movie also ends with the pairing separated. Time is taken to show the ups and downs of their relationship, and an effort was made to show the push and pull of their respective mindsets and ideals. At the heart of it, Bruce is the idealist, and Selina is the pragmatist. And the movie more or less acknowledges how fruitless Batman's mission ultimately is, with her leaving at the end wanting nothing to do with it. I just wish the movie ended with a compromise between the two. By far, my biggest issue with the movie is the ending, because it more or less resets everything back to the status quo. Selina is once again out of the picture, all of the new characters that were introduced here have been dealt with, and there's nothing for me to latch onto. If this movie portrayed Batman as this immovable wall, this stoic guardian, the champion of the night, then it would be much worse off, but at least the ending would make sense. As is, Bruce Wayne is still somewhat malleable. He was swayed into changing his mind about Selina, who was able to overcome her thieving ways, by the way, and regularly doubted himself throughout the film. I don't think it would have been too extreme of a departure for this Batman to be okay with letting the criminals die if it means he can save more people down the line. It would be a different story if Selina just told Batman to shoot Riddler like Talia did in Bad Blood, but that's not what happened. Selina saved his life, and he was so stubborn with his ideals that he threw away everything they'd built up, and I hate that. And I'm supposed to hate that, I get it. This is supposed to be somewhat of a downer ending, but that doesn't mean I have to like it or that it was well done. And unfortunately, it's not the only thing I didn't like. For 1 and 2, the pacing is awful and there are way too many cameos from people that don't actually matter. In The Death of Superman, the cameos are the League, who are understandably called in to fight this horrible character. It makes logical sense in universe. Meanwhile, all of the cameos in this movie feel like they came out of a comic book, if that makes sense. Hush was a big crossover storyline in the Batman comics, and in those crossover events, every villain needs a feature and every member of the Bat family needs to have an important role or their fans would be upset. In the same way, there are 11 cameos in this movie by characters other than Batman, Selina Kyle, and Hush. Bane, Lady Shiva, Batgirl, Poison Ivy, Superman, Lois Lane, Harley Quinn, Joker, Scarecrow, Riddler in his Riddler persona, and Clayface, along with Penguin, Two-Face, and Mr. Freeze through montage. What the fuck? Why are all these people here? Of those, you could have cut everyone except for Bane, Poison Ivy, Riddler, and Clayface, and very little would have changed about the story. That's absolutely ridiculous. This bloat permeates throughout the entire movie, and it makes the core narrative drag on and on and on. This could have easily been a half-hour mini-movie if not for all of these distractions that don't add anything. That montage I mentioned feels like it should go around the 20-minute mark where you'd expect the main couple to have gotten together by, but instead it doesn't happen until around 50 minutes into the movie. 5-0. That's when the movie is approaching its climax. Why? Why is it paced like this? That strangeness is seen throughout the rest of the film primarily because it needs to keep taking time away from the main plot to give each of these other unrelated characters their time in the spotlight, even though it would have been much better off without them. If they wanted to use these encounters, namely the more prominent ones with Bane, Ivy, Joker, and Scarecrow, to further comment on the natures of insanity and control, as all of those villains relate to one of those two things, then that would be one thing. As is, no one makes the connection, so I'm left to assume that it was accidental, and if it wasn't, then cool. They all relate to the themes, but not in a meaningful way, just peripherally. No comment is made on what they have to say about these themes, they just correspond to them in tenuous ways? Neat. As well, there are several issues with Hush's plan. It's never explained why he keeps employing all of these different villains, or what he's using them for. I don't know why he needed Poison Ivy, or Scarecrow, or Bane, who is working for Ivy. The framing of the Joker was only ever used for one scene, and that felt so out of place that it gave me tonal whiplash like you wouldn't believe, and nothing even came of it that was consequential. He then controlled Clayface to appear as him in his Riddler persona, rob a bank pretending to be working for Hush, and then get caught. Why? Was it to buy time to kidnap Selina? There had to have been easier ways to do that than this, and ways that wouldn't potentially expose your true identity in the process too. Come on. And there are other logical and direction-based inconsistencies littered throughout the movie. Batman wouldn't slice through a guy's neck. Ever. At least, never in that context. The water hose wasn't established before it was used to beat Clayface. Both Batman and Catwoman should be dead from their first encounter alone. Both Lois's and Ivy's bindings change from shot to shot when they're tied up by Catwoman. Where did Hush find the Joker when I've been looking for him for 13 goddamn movies? Why didn't Selina slip out of her chains before she was hanging for her life? And how can she support her own weight and the weight of, well, the weight that's literally meant to weigh her down to her death? Finally, the character of Tom Elliott is terrible. He's the generic childhood best friend character who's always nice and supportive and as interesting as watching paint dry. In the comics, Elliot was Hush, and a lot of the stuff that happens in this movie happens in the original Hush storyline. That was changed because it would have been far too obvious, which was the right move, as it would have made the film's narrative much weaker if they adapted it one for one. However, the downside is that you're left with this blank space of a character whose purpose has been stripped from him. To tell this story, Tom Elliot didn't need to be there. Just Hush. His death impacted almost nothing to the plot and didn't even make sense as a revenge storyline plot point because it's now Riddler at the helm who doesn't care. And that's ignoring the baseline stupidity of Bruce just suddenly having this childhood friend character that we've never heard from or about in all of the movies that he's been a part of thus far. Because of course. And as always, I could go on, but I won't. I'm not gonna lie, I'm finding it very hard to come up with a conclusion for this movie. It's a fun time with a good set of main characters, but the constant use of other characters distracts somewhat from their story. The ending was awful, and though the direction and animation quality spiked for that final battle, oftentimes it was as middling as much of the rest of the catalog. I guess overall, Batman Hush is a decent movie. It's definitely not the best of the New 52, but it's not the worst either. Taking everything into account, I'm glad I watched it. However, know that I'm telling the truth when I say that I'm ecstatic that this is the last movie I have to watch that prominently features Batman. Finally, we are free from the Dark Knight. For the most part. We'll see about Apocalypse War.